Okay, guys, welcome back. This is part two of the War for Second of Independence, or also known as the War of 1812, and the rise of nationalism. So this is part two of that lecture, and we'll start right where we actually left off the slide, very slide that we left off, and we're going to continue on. Okay, I got to start my clock again. Give me a second. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the Battle of New Orleans, 1815, this is a kind of a funny battle because of the fact that it actually ends. It's often referred to as the end of the War of 1812, but the reality is that the war actually was not needed. Um, the reason is because the Treaty of Ghent had already been signed 2 weeks earlier. Of course, they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have a way of picking up a phone and saying, "Hey, the war's over. Stop all fighting. It's over. We're done." So no, it takes the Treaty of Ghent is signed in England. It takes a while for this message to come back, so this war it ends up being one of the greatest victories um, in the War of 1812 for the American victors. And it's completely one-sided. The Americans soundly defeat the British and make them. Or there's actually an old Southern song. It says 1814. We took a little trip right on down the Mighty Mississippi. I'll see if I can find that song. Maybe play it in class or something. But the British kept coming, and yada yada yada. Okay, but anyway, it ends up becoming the biggest victory, of the battle, which is kind of ironic for the. And I know I'm using the word properly this time. Ironic that it actually happens because of the fact that the war is actually already over. But that doesn't stop naive citizens believing that the British actually end up signing the Treaty of Ghent and signing the peace treaty because of the battle. And that's not what really happens. Of course, how stories and myths and legends come about. And of course, Jackson becomes the big hero because he leads the forces that ends up defeating it. So again, Jackson, elevates into a very big popular uh, leader in the country, and the stories are all told about Jackson and his army that ends up defeating the British. And they do beat him back, but the fact is that the war was actually already over, so it's important. So going back to the Treaty of Ghent of 1814, uh, the Tsar Alexander I of Russia proposes mediation for the war to bring it to a conclusion because, well, one of the things that Russia was feeling like it was hurting commerce a lot, which it was. And you have 5 American peacemakers that meet in Ghent. The two big ones that we'll talk about a lot here in a couple of years as we're going forth in this subject is John Quincy Adams, who is actually the son of John Adams, and Henry Clay. Now, Henry Clay is a kind of interesting character too. He's really interesting guy to look at. Henry Clay is the type of person that always wants to become president, but never does. I mean, he really, really tries really hard, but he just never gets there. But he is a very significant person in American history, so we can't kind of downplay him. I know he doesn't get the glory that so many other people do, but very important guy. Anyway, the British demands are that there be a neutralized Indian buffer state established in the Great Lakes region. The British want to complete control of the Great Lakes, and they want a substantial part of Maine. Um, on the basic concept was that they're not going to get that, and Americans aren't going to get what they want either. But so on December 24th, Christmas Eve of 1814, becomes an armistice. It was supposed to be an armistice. Remember, the Battle of New Orleans takes place in this period. But the agreement is that both sides agreed to stop fighting and they restore all conquered territory. So this part is the part that's the funny thing about the War of 1812 is because of the fact that all conquered territories are going to be returned status quo as they were before the war. That's why it's often known as a status quo war, a quasi war. It really accomplishes nothing. The American grievances aren't even addressed, such as the Indian menace, the search and seizures problem again, the orders of council. Remember, that was the part of the Embargo Act and the agreement that was going to come about with the Intercourse Act and the Makin's Bill number 2, of course, which, the British never get rid of the Orders of Council. And impressment, which has been a long one. Remember Jay's Treaty, and various confiscations of cargo and stuff that was taken. So it's actually clear that the Americans had not managed to defeat the British. They actually just virtually come to a draw. They never really. It's not a sound victory for the United States, with one exception, and that it's important to understand that the War of 1812 is actually the last major war we ever fight with Great Britain as an enemy. After this period, it grows. Our relationship with Great Britain grows and grows, and it becomes, of course, as today, is one of our strongest allies. So that part you can say in futuristic, or as time goes by, it kind of does accomplish that, and it does send a message out to the world that we're hey, we're here to stay. But there is an event that takes place in 1814 as well, is right toward the end of the war, and as the peace treaty is actually getting ready to be or being discussed, or the envoys are going over. We have the Hartford Convention. This is a big one. It comes up on the test a lot. States involved are Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Vermont. There's 26 total delegates in all, and they meet in complete secrecy for 3 weeks. Now, remember, this is from the New England region. These are the people that do not, and they're mostly all Federalists, and they don't agree with this war, period. Um, they propose to discuss grievances and to seek a redress for wrongs, or what they consider to be wrong. So basically, their final report is this: is their final assistance from Washington to compensate for their loss of trade, because they lost so much trade with the Embargo Act and because of this war. They want a constitutional amendments that require two-thirds vote in Congress for either an embargo for new states to be admitted or war declared, except in the case of an invasion, if you get invaded. So technically, when the British actually invade into Washington, they're saying, hey, you don't have to have the two-thirds votes in that case because you're being invaded. But in all other cases, it did. Um, Unfortunately, they arrive in Washington with this packet, with these list of grievances, and with this concept, or this redress of problems that they have seen fit. And they also, part of this too, is they wanted, I think the president was only to serve one term or something like that. I forgot exactly what it was. I should know that, but for some reason, for a lot of me, I forgot what it was right at this moment. Okay, anyway, bottom line is that it arrives in Washington after the peace treaty's actually been signed. And basically, because they show up with this report, that a lot of Americans began to look at this as almost completely treasonous. Actually, there was a call for some of these delegates to actually be arrested for treason, because they traded with England during the war, and it was considered to be very treasonous. They smuggled things out. They financially supported, and I'll go over that in just a minute too. But it basically ends up being the death of the Federalist Party. You know, the duel with Hamilton and Burr. Hamilton was the last staunch um, icon of the Federalist Party. But the Hartford Convention actually destroys the Federalist Party completely. Now, also, before I actually go on with this one, and my time again is running out pretty fast, but and also the part with the Hartford Convention, let me go back to that one just real quick. Okay, going with the Hartford Convention was that there's also this concept of nullification, this concept of secession, this concept, even though it's not completely written out as such, but this Hartford Convention does come to play, or at least the ideas behind the Hartford Convention of how states can have grievances with the federal government, and you're going to see that rise up again in 1860s, or even before, even 1860s. But with the concept of the Civil War, remember, you're only a few years away from that actually taking place. So that is important, that the connection with that Hartford Convention and how it kind of plays into that to some degree. Okay, basic results of the War of 1812 before my time runs out is you have 6,000 Americans that are killed or wounded in this war. The Republic had shown that it could resist what it regarded as grievous wrongs. So that's a positive concept. Nations developed a new respect for America because it did stand up for itself, as the war hawks had wanted. Remember that this concept that we can't be kicked around all the time. We can't have England stubbing its nose at us every time that it decides it can do whatever it wants to do and not have any ramifications to it. So nations actually do develop a respect for America for doing this. And of course, as I said earlier, the Federalist Party actually dies as a result of the War of 1812. Okay, about 20 seconds. Okay, you have two major war heroes that come out of the War of 1812, Jackson and William Henry Harrison. Um, Manufacturing prospers. Industries become less dependent upon Europe. They begin to manufacturing. We begin to manufacture our own goods. A lot of stuff that we didn't previously before the World War II war because we weren't trading with them. So we had that. And my time just ran out. Let me finish up this slide. And you have Canadian patriotism and nationalism that develops as well. So that concept of being Canadian almost independently of British as well, but again, like I said, not American. And you have nationalism not only in Canada, but you also have nationalism that begins to rage develop within the United States. And it's after the War of 1812. And because, like I said, it's really a drawn war, it didn't accomplish anything. But the concept is that the War of 1812 did kind of unify the nation. People began to actually view themselves, Americans did begin to view themselves as Americans, uh, fully as Americans, and as a United States. It doesn't last long because remember, we're going to go into a civil war in about 50 years um, uh, at the end of the war. So you're talking a very short amount of time. This feeling doesn't last very long. It begins to deteriorate pretty rapidly, as a matter of fact. But especially as the country begins to grow, but it does have that effect. It does create that nationalism within the United States too. You have the Rush-Bagot Agreement, very important agreement to remember for a test. It does usually gets on there somehow or other. So you should know the Rush-Bagot Agreement, which basically limits the naval armament on the lakes, so that both sides kind of agree that nobody will take complete control of the Great Lakes. We won't put a big, large standing navy in there and cause this whole problem to rise up all over again. So that's an important agreement that takes place. And I'm going to stop here, and that'll be the end of part 2. And I'll be coming back with part 3. I'll start with, let me see where I'm going to start with. We'll start with nationalism in part 3. Okay, I'll be right back.